Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time to the green, misty fields of medieval Ireland. Close your eyes and picture it, the cold, earthy smell of a peat fire, the distant bleat of a sheep, and the feeling of rough wool against your skin as you lie on a straw-filled pallet. You hear the soft, rhythmic patter of rain against a thatched roof, a sound as old as the hills themselves, and you're surrounded by the simple, enduring comforts of a peasant's home. It's a quiet life. A tough life. A life built from the ground up on the simple question of what's for dinner. Tonight, we'll explore the answer to that question. From the humble hearth of a farmer to the grand, firelit hall of a king, you'll find out that survival was a daily struggle, and food was a marker of everything, from your social standing to your very chance of survival. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week, let alone a lifetime. But that's what makes this so fascinating to listen to from the comfort of your own bed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the sharp morning chill bite at your nose, a sensation so familiar it's almost comforting. The sun isn't up yet, but the first light is a pale grey, leaking through the wattle walls of your tiny, round hut. The smoke from the dying fire you banked last night still hangs in the air, a scent of burnt peat and wood that is the very smell of home. Your stomach rumbles, a low, persistent sound that reminds you that the first task of the day is also the most important. You sit up on your hard-packed straw pallet, your bones aching from the cold ground, and you reach for your bowl. It's a simple, wooden thing, well worn and smoothed by countless meals. This is the first of many daily rituals. Your breakfast, and indeed the bulk of your diet, is a simple, humble affair, porridge. But it's not the thick, creamy oats you might imagine. This is a thinner, coarser concoction, made from whatever you have on hand, often barley or oats, boiled with water or, if you're lucky, some thin buttermilk. You stir the contents of your pot with a stick, watching the grains swirl in the weak light. This porridge, this pottage, is the foundation of your life. It's a warm-up for your gut, a quick jolt of energy before you head out to the fields. It's a testament to the raw, unadorned simplicity of your existence. You don't eat for pleasure. You eat to fuel your body, to give it the strength to endure. The taste is bland, maybe a little salty if you've been able to trade for a small bit of salt, but mostly it is just sustenance. You eat it quickly, and the warm grain sits heavy and reassuring in your belly. This simple meal is the first step in a long day of labor, a day that will revolve around the seasons, the weather, and the relentless needs of the land. It's a cyclical, repetitive life, and your diet reflects that perfectly. The main staple is always the grain. Historians still argue whether the average peasant was a vegetarian by choice or by necessity, but a day in your life makes it pretty clear it was the latter. You'd love some meat, you really would, maybe a bit of bacon or a leg of lamb, but those are things for other people, for the landowners and the lords who command the land that you work. For now, the grains are your best friends. You finish your bowl, scrape the last bit out, and set it aside. You grab your rough linen tunic and pull it over your head, and you can already feel the cold air on your exposed skin. This is your reality, a world of rough textures and simple tastes, of the constant rumble of an empty stomach and the small, fleeting comfort of a warm meal. It's a far cry from the life of a king, a contrast so stark that it feels like two different worlds exist side by side in this small corner of Ireland. And they do. One is a world of plenty, of rich roasts and spiced wines. The other is your world. A world where a bowl of thin porridge is a blessing, a promise of another day. As you step out of your hut, the cold air hits you fully. But the warmth in your stomach from the porridge is enough to make you feel like you can face the day. The next task is the fields, where the real work begins, and where you'll spend your waking hours to earn the grain that will be your life's blood. The sun is a promise on the horizon, but for now, it's just you, the fields, and the knowledge that your next meal is entirely dependent on your own labor. You've got to admit, it's a bit of a grim reality check. I mean, Remember those ancient Egyptian pyramid builders? Same vibe. Hard work, simple food, and hopefully a long life of backbreaking labor. But for now, you just focus on the first steps of your day, the heavy air, the damp ground, and the promise of a full belly, even if it's just with thin porridge. The sun finally breaks free of the horizon, casting a soft, golden light across the rolling green fields. You're already out there, your feet sinking slightly into the damp earth, a feeling you know as well as your own skin. The air is still cool, but your body is beginning to warm with the rhythmic labor. The day, like your diet, is dictated by the fields. This isn't a job you clock in for. It is your life. Your existence, from the first meal to the last, is a direct result of your relationship with the land. Your primary goal is to coax sustenance from this soil. The vast majority of your energy is spent on this singular pursuit, and your diet reflects this almost perfectly, a monotonous but dependable cycle of grains. Your most reliable friends in this agricultural endeavour are oats and barley. You see, while wheat was prized and grown, it was a much trickier crop for the Irish climate. It preferred warmer, drier conditions. This is where oats and barley truly shined. They were hardy, tolerant of the damp soil and unpredictable weather, and they grew with a vigour that made them the lifeblood of the peasant community. You'd spend your days sowing, weeding, and eventually harvesting these grains. It's back-breaking work, no doubt about it, and you do it all with a simple iron-tipped spade or, if you're lucky enough to share one with a neighbour, a wooden plough pulled by an ox. This is a far cry from the modern tractor. It's a hands-on, deeply personal connection to the food you'll eventually eat. The grains you grow are not just for your own consumption, of course. A significant portion of your harvest is a form of rent, paid to the local lord who owns the land. You watch as a portion of your hard-won barley is loaded onto a cart, heading for the lord's storehouse. A stark reminder of the social hierarchy. It's a simple, undeniable fact of your life. The Lord's table is full because your back is bent. This kind of food as currency system, where labour and harvests are directly exchanged for land use, was a central pillar of medieval life. It's a system you accept without much thought, as it's the only one you've ever known. But what about the grains you do keep? Well, they're not just for porridge. You'd grind some of your oats and barley into a coarse flour using a quern stone, a heavy, hand-operated mill. It's a slow, laborious process that turns the hard grains into a rough, speckle-filled flour. This flour, often called black bread because of its dark colour and coarse texture, is a staple. It's not fluffy or light, it's dense and heavy, and you'd eat it with whatever you could spare, maybe a bit of buttermilk or a chunk of cheese. The quality of bread was a very clear indicator of social status. You probably wouldn't believe me, but the king's bread was likely to be made from imported, finely sifted wheat flour, so white and pure it almost looked unnatural to you. But your bread, your coarse, hearty loaf, is more than enough. And it's not all just for eating. A fair portion of the barley is set aside for brewing. Yes, you and everyone you know drink ale. It's not like the fizzy stuff we have today. This is a cloudy, low-alcohol brew made from fermented grain, water, and sometimes a few foraged herbs for flavour. It's safer to drink than the often unclean water from the stream, and it provides a small bit of calories. You'd drink it all day long. Even the children. A fact that would probably make your modern self raise an eyebrow. This is what's called a small beer or small ale, and it was the universal beverage. It's a testament to the fact that even in this simple life, there's always a way to make things a little more enjoyable. You might be trudging through a muddy field, but you'd be doing it with the gentle, calming buzz of a mild ale. The constant cycle of planting and harvesting means that the availability of food is always on your mind. You work with a sense of urgency, knowing that a bad harvest could mean a long, hungry winter. Historians still argue whether the medieval diet was a monotonous and unhealthy one, but from where you're standing, your diet is predictable and filling, and that's what matters. You're not getting scurvy or rickets, you're getting just enough to keep going. The world revolves around this agricultural calendar, a shared rhythm that binds you to your neighbours and to the land itself. You look out over the field, the furrows are testament to your hard work, and you feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. This is your life, and you wouldn't trade it for anything. Mostly because you don't have a choice, but also because it is a life of purpose. a life where the fruits of your labor are immediate and essential as you trudge back toward your hut. A different kind of hunger begins to gnaw at you, not for the starchy predictability of grain, but for something with a bit more substance and flavor, something to break up the monotony. This is where the earth offers up its more hidden treasures, the things you don't have to sow and harvest in the same way. We're talking about root vegetables, the peasant's best friend and a vital part of your diet. While you've heard tall tales about things like potatoes, a crop that will only arrive much later from a far-off land, your world is full of other, equally nourishing roots. You stop by a small plot near your hut, a patch of ground that you've carefully tended. It's here that you find parsnips, a vegetable that looks a bit like a carrot but is sweeter and more starchy when cooked. You pull one from the soil, its white flesh caked in damp, dark earth. You can smell the subtle sweetness even now. These weren't just a side dish. For you, they were a calorie-dense lifeline, especially in the lean months of winter. You would boil them, roast them in the embers of your fire, or chop them up and throw them into your pottage to give it a little more body. It's funny to think about how modern diets shy away from carbs, but for you, they are the very essence of survival. The more starch, the better. Then there are turnips. These were a real workhorse of the peasant diet. Easy to grow and easy to store. You'd dig a pit in the ground, line it with straw, and bury your turnips there, keeping them cool and dry and safe from the frost. This primitive cold storage system meant you could have freshish vegetables throughout the winter, a small but significant luxury. You'd probably also use the turnip greens, too, a small bit of fresh flavor that was a welcome change from the heavy, earthy root. It's this kind of resourcefulness that separates those who thrive from those who simply survive. Every part of the plant is used, every calorie is cherished. It's an efficient, zero-waste lifestyle born not of ideology but of sheer necessity. The variety of these vegetables, though simple, was surprisingly crucial. It helped to prevent some of the dietary deficiencies that would later plague populations relying on a single crop, like the potato. Historians still argue whether the pre-famine Irish diet was truly nutritionally complete, but there's no doubt that this reliance on a variety of foraged and cultivated roots, along with grains, provided a decent amount of the vitamins and minerals you needed. You'd also find things like wild carrots and radishes, smaller and more fibrous than their cultivated cousins, but still a welcome addition to the stew pot. And let's not forget the humble onion and leek. While not strictly a root, they grew underground and were a key part of your flavor profile. They were a cheap and easy way to make a simple meal taste a little less simple. You'd use them to flavor your stews or even eat them raw, their sharp, pungent taste a pleasant jolt to the tongue. This might sound mundane, but remember, we're talking about a world without spices. The subtle sweetness of a boiled parsnip or the sharp bite of a leek were your version of a gourmet meal. It's all a matter of perspective, right? Your garden is a physical representation of your diet's diversity, or lack thereof, depending on how you look at it. It's a small, fenced-in patch, but within it lies your ability to survive the winter. You reach down and pull a turnip from the cold soil, its round shape a comforting weight in your hand. This is more than just food. It's a promise that you will make it through the cold months, that you will have something to feed your family. You wipe the dirt from the turnip on your rough tunic and head back inside, your mind already on the evening meal. You'll boil this turnip with some oats, maybe a handful of wild herbs you found, and you'll have a dinner that is warm, filling, and, most importantly, enough. You might not be feasting like a king, but you are feasting on the bounty of the earth, and in your world, that is a wealth all its own. With the sun climbing higher, you find yourself with a few hours to spare, a rare and precious gift. The rhythmic drudgery of the fields is paused for now, and your thoughts turn to something a little different, something that adds a splash of color to your otherwise monochromatic diet. It's time to go foraging. You grab your small, woven basket and head into the nearby woods, the trees offering a cool, dappled shade that feels like a balm after working in the open field. This is not just a pleasant walk, it's a necessary hunt, a way to supplement the grain-heavy diet and add a few vital nutrients that your field can't provide. The woods are a kind of living larder, a wild supermarket filled with free food if you just know where to look. You're not hunting for big game. Of course, those are reserved for the lords and kings. You're on the lookout for the smaller, more humble things. First, you spot a patch of wild greens, nettles and dandelions. You'd probably look at these as weeds, but you know better. The young nettle leaves, once boiled, lose their sting and become a rich, iron-filled green, a perfect addition to your stew. Dandelion leaves, though a little bitter, are also a welcome change. This kind of food gathering is a skill passed down through generations, a kind of primal knowledge that your very survival depends on. You know which berries are safe to eat, which mushrooms are deadly, and which roots have a hidden sweetness. As you go deeper, you look for hazelnuts. The hazel tree is a native to Ireland, and its nuts are a fantastic source of fat and protein, a rare find in your diet. You'd be careful to collect them after the squirrels have done the hard work of dropping them. So you'd look around the base of the trees. A small handful of these can make a huge difference, offering a calorie boost that you'd feel almost immediately. They could be eaten raw, or you could grind them up and add them to your porridge for a bit of crunch and a nutty flavour. This isn't just a snack, it's a small dose of luxury. Then there are the berries. Depending on the time of year, you might find wild strawberries, raspberries, or blackberries. They are a fleeting, ephemeral treat, a burst of sweetness that lasts only a few weeks. You'd fill your basket with them, eating a few as you go, staining your fingers a deep purple. You can imagine the look on a king's face if you offered him a handful of wild berries, but for you, they are a delicacy. You might even mash them up and try to dry them into a sort of fruit leather for later, or perhaps stir them into a bowl of yogurt if you had any. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet had enough variety to prevent disease, but the practice of foraging suggests a deep, intuitive knowledge of what the body needed. It's a far cry from the life of a lord who has his food brought to him. You are actively a part of the food chain, a forager and a gatherer in the most literal sense. It connects you to the land in a way that someone who just orders their food could never understand. Every berry you pick is a small victory, a tiny act of defiance against the harshness of your reality. And you're not alone. You might run into a neighbour, also with a basket, and you'd share a nod and a quiet understanding. This is a communal activity, a way to help your family and your neighbours survive. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from that ancient Egyptian script? This is the Irish equivalent, a kind of weird but totally practical thing that people did just to get by. You wouldn't think of a medieval Irish peasant as a gourmet, but in a way, you are. You're an expert on what the land can provide, an intimate knowledge that the king, for all his fine food, will never possess. Your world is one of flavours and textures that come directly from the earth, and as you head back home with your basket half full, you feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. It's not a full meal, but it's a vital and welcome addition to the simple life you lead back at your hut. The small, quiet sounds of daily life fill the air. The crackling of the fire, the soft scuff of your feet on the dirt floor, and the low, contented chewing of your single cow, tied just outside the door. This cow, a small, hardy creature, isn't just a beast of burden. She is a walking, breathing larder, and she represents the difference between a life of constant hunger and one of simple sustenance. She is the source of dairy riches, and a crucial component of your diet. While a king's larder might be stocked with expensive cheeses and rich cream, your cow provides you with the basics, and they are everything. The first and most obvious gift is her milk. You'd milk her by hand, a daily chore you've been doing since you were a child. The milk is thick and creamy, and you wouldn't drink it all at once. Much of it would be left to curdle, separating into curds and whey. This isn't a mistake. It's a deliberate act. The curds, a solid protein mass, are pressed to make a soft, fresh cheese, while the leftover whey, a thin, watery liquid, is used for cooking or drinking. Nothing is wasted. The cheese you make is simple, a bit crumbly, and not aged for long. It's a bit tangy, and it's a wonderful source of protein and fat, something your grain-heavy diet desperately needs. You'd eat it with your black bread or crumble it into your porridge. This cheese is your main source of animal protein, and you'd guard it carefully, perhaps even wrapping it in cloth and storing it in a cool spot to keep it from going bad too quickly. It's a taste of richness that you don't get very often, and you savour every bite. The practice of cheese-making was a cornerstone of medieval Irish households, an art form passed from mother to daughter. And then there's butter. Butter was a kind of liquid gold in your world. You'd churn the cream from the milk to make it, and the process, though tiring, yields a yellow, flavorful fat that is worth its weight in, well, not gold, but certainly in grain. You'd use it to cook with, or to spread on your coarse bread for a treat. Butter was so valuable that it was often used as a form of payment or a bartering tool. It was also an important way of storing the fat from the milk for later. The butter would often be salted and stored in a crock, and we'll talk about a very quirky way of storing it later, which is something you'd probably find hilarious and disgusting all at once. This reliance on dairy also highlights a core difference between you and the more settled agricultural societies of mainland Europe. The ancient Irish society was historically much more pastoral, centered on cattle ownership. While farming became more common, the cow retained its central role. Your wealth, your standing, was often measured in the number of cattle you owned. You might not have a whole herd, but your single cow is your personal bank account, your lifeline. This cultural connection to cattle is so ingrained that historians still argue whether the Irish diet was ever truly divorced from its pastoral roots, even as it became more agrarian. This focus on dairy also explains why meat was so rare on your table. Your cow is too valuable alive. She gives you milk, curds, and butter on a daily basis. To slaughter her for a single, fleeting feast would be an act of true desperation or foolishness. She's a long-term investment. This is a crucial point to remember. For a peasant, the living animal is almost always more valuable than the dead one. You can almost taste the sharp tang of the fresh cheese on your tongue, and the smooth, rich flavor of the butter. These are not just foods, they are the tangible products of your hard work, the rewards of a life lived in harmony with the land and the animals you tend. As you finish your chores for the day, you look at your cow with a sense of gratitude. She is not just an animal, she is a partner in your survival. She is a source of protein and fat, a steady, reliable comfort in a world of constant uncertainty, and in your simple life, that is something to be treasured as you go about your daily chores. A flash of red and brown catches your eye in the small, fenced-in yard next to your hut. A clucking hen, pecking at the dirt, suddenly lets out a triumphant squawk. You know what that means. You walk over and, nestled in the straw of a small wooden box, you see it, a single, perfect, warm hen's egg. This is not a common occurrence. Your hens are small and scrawny, and they lay only sporadically. An egg is not a daily breakfast, it is a special treat, a moment of unexpected richness in an otherwise lean existence. For you, this egg is more than just food. It's a tiny, self-contained bundle of energy, a complete meal in a shell. You can imagine the king and his court feasting on entire flocks of roasted fowl, but for you, this one egg is a source of joy. You bring it inside, holding it carefully in your palm. This egg is a symbol of life itself, a rare and precious gift from your humble, feathered friends. You wouldn't just crack it into your porridge. Oh no, that would be a waste of its unique character. Instead, you might gently boil it and eat it on its own, savoring the richness of the yolk and the soft texture of the white. It's a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure. The egg also plays a different role in your life. It's a food of healing. If a child in your family is sick, an egg might be boiled and given to them. Its concentrated nutrients seen as a kind of medicine. The small amount of protein and fat is a welcome boost to a struggling body. It is this kind of practical wisdom, this intimate knowledge of the properties of food, that guides your daily life. You don't have doctors or pharmacies, you have your garden and your animals, and you know how to use them. The act of eating this egg is a break from the norm, a departure from the endless cycle of grain and vegetables. It's a taste of a different world, a world where food is not just a fuel source but a source of pleasure and comfort. This is a very real concept, something modern people take for granted. You don't have snacks or desserts, you have simple, filling meals. The egg is your dessert, your treat, your special occasion. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet was truly monotonous, but moments like this, a fresh egg or a handful of wild berries, provided a small but vital variation. It makes you think about the social status of food. You can picture a fancy royal chef, meticulously poaching an egg for the king's breakfast, perhaps with some finely chopped herbs. You might even laugh to yourself at the thought. The king's egg is an ingredient in a larger dish, a part of a complex culinary performance. Your egg is the main event. It's a humbling but also empowering thought. Your life is simpler, yes, but there's a certain authenticity to it that the king, for all his riches, can never experience. He's disconnected from the source of his food. While you are intimately familiar with it, you know the exact hen it came from, you know the sound she made when she laid it, and you know exactly how long you have to wait for the next one. You can imagine the court jester telling a joke about a goose that laid a golden egg. For you, an egg, any egg, is as good as gold. This single, small egg is a reminder that in a world defined by its hardships, there are still small, unexpected moments of abundance. As you crack the shell and watch the white spill out, you feel a sense of profound satisfaction. It's not a lot, but it is enough. And in your world, enough is the greatest luxury of all. The familiar, grey monotony of your daily life is broken, suddenly and joyously, by the sound of church bells. They ring out across the fields, their peal a promise of something different, something more. This is no ordinary day, this is a feast day, a religious holiday, and it brings with it a welcome break from the relentless cycle of work and a change in your diet. The church, in this world, is not just a spiritual centre, it's a social and economic hub, and its calendar dictates the rhythm of your life, from seasons of fasting to seasons of feasting. You wash your face and hands, put on your slightly less worn tunic, and head toward the village church, the path filled with your neighbours, all moving with a lighter step. The atmosphere is one of communal relief. For a peasant, a feast day isn't just about the religious observance, it's about the food. You've been fasting, in a way, since the last feast day, and now is the time for a small indulgence. The church, or perhaps the local lord, will often provide a communal meal, a rare moment where everyone eats together, regardless of their station. Well, almost everyone. You still wouldn't be at the same table as the Lord, but you'd be eating the same kind of food, at least for a day. The food is a step up from your usual fare. There might be some salted pork or perhaps a piece of boiled goat. For you, this is the equivalent of a modern person's Thanksgiving dinner. The meat is tough and a bit stringy, but it's a taste you only get on these occasions, and you chew it with reverence. There might also be a loaf of finer bread, perhaps even a round of softer cheese. These are not just calories, they are a sign of community and shared celebration. The church's influence on diet was immense, not just in dictating fast days, but also in providing for the poor on feast days. It was a kind of social safety net, albeit a very thin one. Historians still argue whether the church's charitable giving was truly about feeding the poor or about maintaining social order. But for you, the person with an empty stomach, the reason doesn't matter. The food is there, and that is what counts. Beyond the communal meal, feast days also meant a break from labour, which allowed for a different kind of food preparation. Instead of your usual quick, simple meals, you might have time to make a more elaborate stew with all the vegetables you can spare, maybe even with a bit of wild onion or garlic to add flavour. Your wife might even make a simple oat cake, sweetened with a bit of foraged honey if you're lucky enough to have any. It's a moment to take a breath, to enjoy the fruits of your labour without the immediate pressure of having to get back to the field. The day would be filled with more than just food. There would be music, stories, and the general hum of conversation. A stark contrast to the quiet solitude of your daily work. The ale would flow more freely, too, a stronger, more celebratory brew than your usual small beer. You'd sit with your friends and family, sharing stories and jokes, a fleeting sense of joy that helps to sustain you through the long, hard months ahead. This is a moment of connection, a reminder that your life is not just about survival, but also about community. You think about the religious significance of the day. Of course, you'd say your prayers and thank God for the small bounty you've received, but in the quiet moments, you know that this day is as much about the food as it is about faith. It's a physical manifestation of a spiritual promise. The feast day is a glimpse of a different world, a world where hunger doesn't dominate every waking thought. It's a world that exists for a single, fleeting day, a world you'd carry in your memory to get you through the leaner times. As the sun begins to set and you head back to your hut, your belly is full, and your heart is a little lighter. With the feast day fading into a warm memory, you're back to your routine, but with a slight spring in your step. It's early evening, the sun casting long shadows, and you decide to do something you've been looking forward to all day. You head to the local alehouse, a simple, smoky, and welcoming place that serves as the heart of your small community. It's more than just a place to drink, it's the village's social hub, a place where news is shared, stories are told, and a weary body can finally rest. The building is as simple as your own home, maybe a bit larger, with a thatched roof and a single, low-ceilinged room filled with rough-hewn wooden benches and tables. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, spilled ale, and the low murmur of conversation. You sit down, and the innkeeper, a woman with a kind but tired face, places a wooden tankard in front of you. This is your drink of choice, and for everyone else, too. It's not water, it's ale, and it's what you'll drink for the rest of the night. The ale, as you already know, is not the strong, alcoholic brew we might associate with pubs today. This is a cloudy, low-alcohol beverage, a small beer that is safe to drink because the brewing process kills the waterborne pathogens that would otherwise make you sick. It's a bit sour, a bit bitter, and incredibly filling. It's a kind of liquid bread, providing a few extra calories and a gentle buzz that takes the edge off a long day of hard labor. You'd drink this from sunup to sundown, and so would your neighbors, and even their children. It's a staple for everyone, a kind of universal beverage. Historians still argue whether the high consumption of low-alcohol ale had long-term health effects on the medieval population, but for you, it's a necessary part of life. The alehouse is where you catch up on all the local gossip. You hear about the Lord's latest hunting trip, the progress of your neighbour's crops, and the latest stories from a travelling merchant. It's where your oral history is passed down, a real-life version of a social media feed, but with more smells. You might sit with an older man who tells you a story of a legendary feast from a time long past, a kind of food lore that weaves itself into the fabric of your community. These stories, these shared moments over a tankard of cloudy ale, are as nourishing as the food you eat. They feed the soul in a way that porridge never could. There's a subtle humour in this shared experience. Everyone is a little tipsy, a little relaxed, and the jokes are a bit better. You might hear a quip about a greedy lord or a lazy priest, a kind of light-hearted, rebellious moment that is tolerated in this space. Remember that quirky tidbit about bog butter we'll get to later? The alehouse is where you'd hear a story about someone who found a crock of it and what they thought it was. It's the kind of place where you learn the weird and wonderful facts of your own world. You think about the contrast between this simple gathering and the grand feast hall you've only ever heard about. The King's Hall is a place of rigid etiquette and loud, boisterous spectacle. This alehouse is a place of quiet camaraderie. You don't have jesters and bards, but you have your friends, your neighbours, and the comforting hum of shared life. You're all equal in this room, a shared humanity brought together by a shared need for rest and a shared love for a simple brew as you take another long drink. The world of the fields and the hut begins to fade, replaced by the simple, enduring comfort of being with your people. You're back in the quiet of your hut, and your mind drifts to one of the most peculiar culinary practices you've ever heard of. A legend whispered about in the alehouse. It's a tradition that seems completely alien to your modern sensibilities, a practice that is so deeply intertwined with the land itself that it feels more like a ritual than a simple act of food storage. We're talking about bog butter. And its story is as strange as it sounds. Bog butter is a type of butter that was preserved by burying it in a bog, or peat bog. Bogs are these incredible, waterlogged landscapes that are poor in oxygen and rich in a kind of acid that is incredibly good for preservation. When you bury something in a bog, it doesn't rot, it just gets preserved in a kind of time capsule. For some reason, and this is a bit of a mystery, your ancestors decided this was a good place to store butter. You'd churn your butter, often unsalted, and then pack it into a wooden container, a kind of barrel or crock, or sometimes just wrap it in a piece of cloth. Then, you'd carry it to a bog, dig a hole, and bury it deep in the peat. This wasn't just a quirky way to store food. There were several very practical reasons for it. First, it was a fantastic form of long-term preservation. You could bury butter in the spring or summer and dig it up months or even years later. The bog's cool. Anaerobic conditions kept it from spoiling. Second, it was a way of hiding your wealth. Remember, your cow is a source of wealth, and her butter is liquid gold. If you were being raided by a rival tribe, or if there was a local conflict, you couldn't just pack up your cow and run, but you could bury your most valuable food product, a secret stash that only you knew about. It was a kind of primitive bank vault. And finally, some historians still argue whether the bog butter was buried for a kind of religious or ceremonial purpose, a gift to the earth, perhaps, or a way to ensure a good harvest. The truth is, it was probably a mix of all these reasons, a tradition that was part practicality and part superstition. Now, for the really weird part, when the butter is dug up, it's not just a little funky. The peat and bog acids chemically alter the fat, giving it a very distinct, pungent aroma and a slightly waxy or cheese-like consistency. It's often described as smelling of, well, earthy is a polite way to put it. Others say it's more like a strong cheese or even a bit like soap. But to you, a peasant who has eaten nothing but grains and a bit of cheese, it would be a unique and highly prized delicacy, a flavor you would get nowhere else. It's a reminder that flavor is entirely a matter of what you are used to. You might gag at the thought of eating a modern candy bar, and a modern person would probably lose their mind at the smell of bog butter. It's all a matter of perspective, a kind of food culture shock that spans centuries. The fact that so many crocks and clumps of bog butter have been found by archaeologists, some dating back thousands of years, tells you just how widespread this practice was. Imagine digging in the field and finding a lump of butter from your great-great-great-great-grandfather. What would you do? You'd probably eat it. Or at least, you'd try. It's a true, real-life mystery and a testament to the ingenuity of your ancestors. As you drift off to sleep, you can almost smell the unique, earthy aroma of that ancient butter. It's a smell that belongs to the land, a smell of history itself. It's a testament to the way that you, and all the people like you, are so intimately connected to the earth. Your food comes from it, your wealth is hidden in it, and even your history is preserved there, waiting to be rediscovered centuries later by people who will marvel at your resourcefulness, and you thought a peanut butter and jelly sandwich was a good way to store food. Your mind, still a little sleepy from the last thought, begins to wander to the bigger picture. You, a peasant, spend your entire life working the land to get grain. But was it always this way? You can't remember a time when you didn't have to work the fields, but you've heard the old stories. The tales told by the Seanchai, storytellers, of a time when the world was wilder, and food came not from the careful sowing of seeds but from the hunt and the herd. This is the great and often unspoken shift in your society, the move from foraging to farming, a change that fundamentally altered the very nature of your diet and your life. Your ancestors were likely a mix of hunter-gatherers and pastoralists, people who followed their cattle herds across the landscape. Their diet would have been centered on meat and milk, supplemented by whatever wild plants and berries they could find. A feast would have meant a freshly killed wild boar, roasted over an open fire. Their lives would have been dictated by the movement of animals and the seasons of the wild. It was a life of more freedom, perhaps, but also more danger and less certainty. A bad hunting season could mean starvation. You, on the other hand, have the certainty of your fields. It's a trade-off. You might not have the excitement of the hunt, but you have the predictability of the harvest. This shift was a slow one, a gradual process that spanned centuries. People started to build more permanent settlements, to fence off fields, and to domesticate crops and animals. The grain, once a minor part of the diet, became the central pillar. This change was driven by a need for stability. Farming could support a larger population in a smaller area, and it was less reliant on the whims of wild animals. It created a society where land ownership was the ultimate form of wealth, and a man's status was measured not just by the cattle he owned, but by the land he controlled. This transition also had a profound effect on the distribution of food. In a hunting society, a skilled hunter could feed many people. In a farming society, those with the most land control the food supply. This created the social hierarchy you live in today, a world where the lord owns the land, and you, the peasant, are forever bound to it. The food on your table is a constant reminder of your place in the social order. The king's diet is a direct result of this shift. He has so much meat and so many spices because he controls the land where the animals live and the routes where the spices travel. Historians still argue whether this change was a net positive for the average person, but you can't help but think about how much simpler life might have been if you could just wander the fields with your herd, eating what you found. You think about that little bowl of porridge you ate this morning. It's a direct link to this change. It represents stability and a kind of agricultural security that your ancestors would have envied. but it also represents the end of a wilder, more varied diet. You are an agricultural machine, a person whose body is fueled by grain, just like the horse is fueled by oats. It's a stark reality, but it's the only one you've ever known. The romance of the hunt is long gone, replaced by the reality of the plough. You might not have the exciting meals of the past, but you have the comfort of knowing that, unless the harvest fails, you will not starve, and in your world, that comfort is worth a great deal. As you drift closer to sleep, you start to consider the chasm that separates your life from that of the ruling class. We've talked about your daily porridge and root vegetables, but what did the king eat? The simple answer is meat, and lots of it. For you, meat is an almost mythological food, a thing you see only in your dreams or on the rarest of feast days. For the king, it's a daily staple, a constant presence on his table, and a symbol of his power and his status. You see, in this world, meat consumption is not just about calories, it's a political statement. The right to hunt, to raise and slaughter animals for food, is tied directly to land ownership. Since the king and the lords own all the land, they control all the animals. You might see a wild boar or a deer in the woods near your hut, but you know that to hunt it would be a crime, an act of poaching that could cost you your life. Those animals belong to the Lord, and their meat is destined for his table. This is the ultimate symbol of social inequality, a reality you live with every day. The king's table would be groaning under the weight of roasted meats, wild boar, venison, deer, and a variety of fowl like geese, ducks, and swans would be commonplace. These aren't just everyday meals, they are spectacles. A whole boar might be roasted on a spit, its head still attached, a kind of primal display of dominance. The meat would be rich and gamey, a stark contrast to the tough, salted pork that you might be lucky enough to get a taste of. The king's diet would be a parade of protein, a constant indulgence that your body, used to a simple diet of grains, would probably struggle to digest. This abundance of meat wasn't just for the king, it was a way of showcasing his generosity and his wealth. He would feast his court, his guests, and his soldiers on these roasts, a kind of visible proof of his power. It's a kind of propaganda, a way of saying, "Look at my wealth, look at how much I can provide." This kind of conspicuous consumption was a central part of royal life. It's a far cry from your quiet, humble meal in a one-room hut. You might share a bit of cheese with your family, but the king shares a roasted boar with an entire hall of people. Historians still argue whether the king's diet was truly as healthy as the peasants'. While you might be missing out on protein, you're also not dealing with gout or the other health issues that a rich, meat-heavy diet could cause. Your body is lean and strong from a lifetime of labor, while the king's body, for all its fine food, might be a bit more indulgent. It's a quirky kind of paradox. The rich man's food could be slowly killing him, while your simple food is what keeps you alive and strong. As you picture the great haunches of meat, you can almost smell the roasting flesh and the rich, dripping fat. It's a delicious, tantalizing thought, but it's not a real one. It belongs to a different world, a world where food is not just sustenance but a weapon, a symbol, and a display of power. You are a human being, but in this system, you are also just a part of the machine that produces the food for the king's table. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are grateful for the simple fact that, for tonight, your stomach is full. Even if it's just with a bowl of thin porridge, you are summoned. A runner from the Lord's manor arrives, breathless, with a message. The local laird, your lord, is holding a small gathering, and you, as a representative of your family, are expected to attend. The reason? A small bit of paperwork, a matter of tax collection. Nothing exciting. But the invitation is a rare one, and it offers you a chance to glimpse a world you only ever hear about in whispers. You clean yourself up as best you can, put on your sturdiest tunic, and make the walk to the manor house, your stomach a nervous, empty pit of anticipation. As you approach the great hall, the difference in the air itself is palpable. The scent is no longer of peat and damp earth, but of wood smoke and roasting meat. This is a scent that, for you, is synonymous with wealth. You enter the hall, and your eyes take a moment to adjust to the dim, flickering light from the central fire pit. The walls are not wattle and daub like your home. They are solid stone, covered with tapestries that depict great hunting scenes. The floor is covered in rushes, and the air is thick with the laughter and conversation of the Lord's court. You stand in the back, a silent observer, as the Lord, a large man with a thick beard and an even thicker belt, holds court. He is sitting at a raised table, and before him is a feast you can barely comprehend. There's a roasted joint of venison, its skin a crispy brown, its juices dripping onto the plate below. There are platters of bread, so white and so fine it looks like a different food altogether. There are bowls of thick, creamy stew, and you can see chunks of some kind of meat floating in it. The Lord and his court are eating with their fingers, tearing off pieces of meat and bread, their faces slick with grease. It's a primal, almost savage display of consumption, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost solemn act of you eating your pottage alone. This is the very heart of the social hierarchy. The food on the table is a physical representation of the Lord's power. He doesn't just own the land, he controls the food supply. Every bite of that venison is a reminder that he holds the right to the hunt, a right you can never possess. Every piece of that fine white bread is a reminder that he has access to the finest grains, while you are left with the coarse, dark stuff. This is not just a meal, it is a display of dominance. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant felt a sense of resentment at this kind of spectacle. But for you, the feeling is more complex. It's a mix of awe, of envy, and of a strange, almost resigned acceptance. This is just the way the world works. As you wait for the Lord to finish his meal and attend to your business, you can't help but notice the small details. The Lord's hounds are lying by the fire, chewing on bones that would be considered a feast for you. A servant is pouring a dark, rich liquid from a jug, likely wine or a strong, spiced ale, a drink you've never tasted. The sound of their feasting is a low, continuous rumble, and it's a sound that you'll remember long after you've left. It's the sound of a different life, a life where hunger is a choice, not a constant companion. You finally get to speak to the Lord. Your business is conducted quickly, and you are dismissed. As you walk out of the hall, back into the crisp evening air, the memory of that feast stays with you. It's a tantalizing glimpse of a world you will never truly be a part of. The food you saw, the venison, the white bread, the rich stew, will live in your mind as a kind of a dream, a fantasy of a different life, and as you walk back to your hut, to your simple porridge and your quiet hearth, you are reminded that the distance between a peasant and a king isn't measured in miles, but in the food on their table. Having glimpsed the world of the laird, your imagination now takes a leap of faith to the top of the food chain, to a life you could only ever dream of. You close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, you are transported to the king's feasting hall. This isn't just a place to eat, it's a place of ritual, spectacle, and a dazzling display of wealth and power. If the Lord's hall was a banquet, the king's is a full-blown opera, and you are no longer an observer, but a ghostly presence, able to see and hear everything without being seen. The hall is immense, a cavernous space with a high, vaulted ceiling and walls adorned with magnificent tapestries depicting battles and heroic legends. The air is warm and hazy with the smoke from a massive central fire pit, and the scent is intoxicating, a complex blend of roasting meats, pungent spices, and sweet honeyed mead. You can hear the low thrum of conversation, the clatter of platters and cutlery, and the melodious strains of a harp playing in a corner. The king, a figure of imposing authority, sits at the head of a long oak table on a raised dais, a position that physically elevates him above everyone else. A constant reminder of his social standing. The sheer quantity of food is staggering. Unlike your one simple pot, there are dozens of dishes, each one more extravagant than the last. Servants, dressed in fine livery, move with practiced ease, bringing out platter after platter. There are whole roasted swans, their feathers still attached, a kind of dramatic flourish. There are haunches of venison so large they must have come from the most magnificent of stags. There are pies filled with rich, savoury meats, and loaves of bread so white they seem to glow in the flickering light. This is a feast, not for survival, but for entertainment. A kind of theatrical performance where the main characters are the dishes themselves. This spectacle is not just for show, it serves a crucial political function. By providing such an immense feast, the king demonstrates his power and his generosity. He is not just a ruler, he is a provider, a source of all good things. His wealth isn't just measured in land and cattle, it is measured in the food he can serve to his court, his guests, and his allies. This kind of feasting solidifies alliances, rewards loyalty, and reinforces the king's status as the ultimate authority. Historians still argue whether these feasts were truly enjoyed by all, or if they were a kind of tedious social obligation, but from your ghostly vantage point, it looks like pure, unadulterated pleasure. You can almost feel the heat from the fire, hear the clinking of tankards, and smell the rich aroma of the food. It's a sensory overload, a world away from the simple, predictable smells and sights of your own life. The king is not just eating, he is performing, a constant act of public consumption that reinforces his power. He has an entire kitchen staff, a team of chefs, and a legion of servants dedicated to nothing but his meals. This is a world where food is art, a statement, and a form of diplomacy. You think about your own humble meal, the simple porridge and the wild greens, and you are reminded that the distance between a peasant and a king is not just a physical one, it's a culinary one. The food you eat is a necessity, the food the king eats is a celebration. And as you watch the spectacle unfold, you know that this is a world you will never truly be a part of. But for a moment, you can at least imagine it, and that, in your quiet, simple life, is a kind of magic all its own. After that extravagant mental journey to the king's hall, you find your thoughts narrowing to the specifics of the royal diet. What made it so different? It all came down to one thing, the right to hunt and the resulting abundance of royal roasts and the spoils of the hunt. For you, a deer is a beautiful, wild creature to be admired from afar, an animal that belongs to the Lord. For the king, it's dinner. The forests and open lands are his personal hunting ground, a royal prerogative that is both a sport and a source of incredible food. The hunt itself was a magnificent, theatrical event. You'd hear the distant baying of hounds and the shouts of the royal hunting party as they rode past your fields. A loud and boisterous spectacle that felt as alien as a passing comet. The king would hunt wild boar, an incredibly dangerous and prized animal, or a majestic stag. The kill was not just a means to an end, it was a display of bravery and skill, and the result of that kill was a feast of fresh meat that you couldn't even imagine. Imagine a haunch of venison, its skin crackling and dark, the meat inside tender and pink, or a whole boar, roasted on a spit, its fatty skin bubbling and turning to a golden crackle. These weren't just meals, they were centerpieces, symbols of the king's dominance over the wild. These meats, so rich and flavorful, were a world away from the tough, salted pork that was the only meat you might ever get to eat. They were also a kind of proof of a job well done. The successful hunt was rewarded with a great meal, a kind of primal celebration that was as old as time itself. And it wasn't just the big game. The king also had the right to hunt fowl. You might see a goose or a duck in the wild, but you wouldn't dare touch it. The king's fowlers, however, would have a field day, bringing back huge hauls of wild birds. These would be prepared in all kinds of ways, from roasted swans, a grand and showy dish, to delicate little roasted quails. The variety of meat on the king's table was staggering. This constant access to fresh meat meant the king and his court were receiving a diet rich in protein and fat, a stark contrast to your grain-based sustenance. This royal indulgence also explains a lot about the social structure. The king had his own private gamekeepers who guarded the forests and his private land, a kind of food security team. They were there to ensure that no one, especially not a peasant like you, would dare to poach his royal dinner. Historians still argue whether the strict laws against poaching were more about controlling the food supply or about asserting a monarch's authority over the land. But for you, the result is the same. Stay away from the king's deer. You think about the contrast. Your life is one of patience and predictability, of waiting for the grains to grow. The king's life, at least when it comes to food, is one of action and immediate reward. He takes what he wants from the land, and the land, in a way, provides. The spoils of the hunt are not just food, they are a physical manifestation of his power. A reminder that the world is a larder for him to enjoy. For you, it's just a world you have to survive in. As you drift deeper into sleep, you can almost taste that rich, fatty meat, a flavor you can only ever experience in your imagination. Your mind is a ghost now, wandering through the great kitchens of the king's palace. You've seen the meat, but you know that every good feast begins with the most basic food of all, bread. And the difference between your bread and the king's bread is a story in itself, a perfect metaphor for the chasm between a peasant and a king. For you, bread is a simple, dark, and heavy thing. For the king, it's a testament to the baker's skill and the king's loaf. The baker in the king's court is a master craftsman, a person of great importance and skill. He doesn't just make bread, he makes a status symbol. The king's flour is not the coarse, dark stuff you get from your hand-operated quernstone. His flour is made from finely ground wheat, imported from far-off lands, and it is meticulously sifted to remove every single bit of bran. The result is a flour so pure and so white it would probably look like a strange, inedible dust to you. This is the ultimate luxury, a food that is beautiful but also tells you, without a single word, that the person eating it has access to the best resources and the finest labor. The bread itself would be baked in a huge brick oven, a marvel of engineering that you've only ever seen in the Lord's manor. The heat is consistent and high, and the resulting loaf is light, fluffy, and golden brown. It's a work of art, a soft, yielding thing that would melt in your mouth, a stark contrast to the dense, black lump that is your daily bread. Your bread, made from oats and barley, is dark, heavy, and full of the rough husks that provide fiber but also make it tough to chew. It's a bread for survival, not for pleasure. Historians still argue whether the peasant's bread, for all its coarseness, was actually healthier due to its high fiber content, but you'd gladly trade it for the soft, white loaf any day. This difference in bread is so important that it's embedded in the very language. The word flour comes from the French word for flour, a term used to describe the finest, most delicate part of the ground grain. The finest flour was a luxury reserved for the elite. The quality of bread was also a clear marker of social hierarchy. The king's loaf was pain de luxe, or luxury bread, while your bread was pain de munition, or sustenance bread, the same bread given to soldiers. It's a clear and unmistakable way of saying, you are a soldier, and I am a king. And it wasn't just about the bread itself. The king's table would also feature a variety of other baked goods, from small, spiced cakes to rich, buttery pastries, all made from that same fine, white flour. These were not just foods, they were displays of culinary skill and access to expensive ingredients. You might occasionally eat a simple oatcake, but a pastry made from fine flour, honey, and butter, that's something you can't even comprehend. It's a world where a simple grain can be transformed into a work of art, and it's a world you'll never be a part of. The baker is an artist, and the king is his patron. As you watch, the baker is not just kneading dough, he's kneading a symbol of power and wealth into every single loaf. You're a baker of sorts too, but your masterpiece is simply getting enough flour to get through the week. Your mental journey into the king's world takes you from the feast hall to its very heart, the royal kitchens. This isn't a simple hut with a fire pit, it's a bustling, organized, and vast operation. The king's cook is not just a person who prepares food, they are a kind of alchemist, a culinary artist who transforms raw ingredients into works of wonder. For you, cooking is a matter of survival, a simple act of boiling grain. For them, it is a matter of prestige, a complex art form that requires specialized skills and tools. The kitchen is a loud, hot, and chaotic place, a stark contrast to the quiet simplicity of your own hearth. There are multiple fires burning, each with a different purpose. There are huge cauldrons bubbling with stews and soups, spits turning slowly over the flames with great haunches of meat, and a team of scullions, apprentices, and specialized chefs all working together in a kind of choreographed chaos. This is not a one-person job, it's a team sport. The head chef, the maître d'hôtel, has a position of high status. Trusted with the king's health and a large part of his reputation, the dishes they prepare are unlike anything you have ever tasted. They are not simple boils or roasts, they are complex creations. A roasted pig might be stuffed with dates and plums, a kind of sweet and savoury surprise. A fish might be poached in wine and then covered in a rich, buttery sauce. There are pies with intricate crusts, and stews with dozens of different ingredients. The complexity of these dishes is a direct result of the availability of resources. They have access to meats you can't even dream of, to a variety of vegetables and herbs, and to, most importantly, exotic spices. Historians still argue whether the king's table was truly as refined as it was described in texts, but there's no doubt that the food was a world away from a peasant's simple fare. These dishes were designed to impress, to show off the king's wealth and his connections to the outside world. The ability to cook with such a wide variety of ingredients was a sign of power and control. They weren't just cooking, they were performing. And they had the tools to do it. There would be special knives, large mortars and pestles, and a variety of pots and pans made of metal, a luxury you would never be able to afford. The kitchen itself, with its stone walls and high ceiling, was a testament to the effort and resources dedicated to the king's food. The sound of the kitchen is a constant hum of activity, the chopping of vegetables, the clanging of pots, the sizzling of meat, and the chatter of the staff all blend together into a kind of symphony. It's a symphony of excess, a sound that speaks of abundance and a world where food is not a struggle but a celebration. The sheer number of people working in the kitchen is also telling. Your entire family works to get enough food for yourselves, but the king has an entire team of people whose only job is to prepare his meals. It's a kind of human resourcefulness that is almost as impressive as the food itself. You think about your own small pot, hanging over a peat fire, and you can't help but feel a kind of wonder at the scale of the king's operation. The royal kitchen is not just a place for cooking, it's a testament to the intricate social and economic web that supports the ruling class. Every dish that leaves that kitchen is a story of trade, of power, and of a life you can only ever imagine. From the bustling kitchens, your mind follows the scent, a scent that is utterly foreign to your nose, that of exotic spices and the long-distance trade. For you, flavour comes from foraged herbs or a bit of salt. But for the king, flavour comes from halfway across the world, brought by merchants on perilous journeys across land and sea. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, ginger, and cloves were not just ingredients, they were a form of currency, a display of wealth that was as clear as a king's crown. These spices were incredibly valuable. Pepper, for instance, was so prized that it was sometimes used to pay rent or a dowry. It was the black gold of the medieval world. The journey these spices took was long and dangerous, passing through many hands, each one adding to the cost. They would come from the far-off lands of Asia, travelling the Silk Road or by ship across the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, eventually making their way to the European markets. For you, the source of your food is the land around you. For the king, the source is the entire known world. The king's chef would use these spices not just for flavour, but for a kind of showmanship. A simple roast could be turned into a spectacle by the addition of a few grains of black pepper. A stew could be made into a complex, multi-layered dish by the addition of a pinch of cinnamon or a bit of ginger. Spices were used in almost every dish, not just for flavour, but to show that the king had access to these rare and expensive ingredients. Historians still argue whether the abundance of spices in medieval royal cooking was due to a taste for strong flavours or a need to mask the taste of spoiled meat. But you know that in your world, any flavour at all is a welcome one. The spice trade was a kind of economic and political engine that drove a huge part of the medieval world. It was a source of great wealth for the merchants who controlled it, and a constant source of envy for those who didn't. The king's ability to have a well-stocked spice cabinet was a sign of his power, his influence, and his wealth. It meant he had the connections and the resources to trade with the outside world. It was a kind of culinary diplomacy, a way of saying, I am a powerful ruler, and my kingdom is connected to the world. The use of these spices also shows a kind of sophisticated palate that you can't even begin to comprehend. You are used to the taste of salt, and maybe a little wild garlic. The king's tongue is used to the sharp bite of pepper, the sweetness of cinnamon, and the pungent heat of ginger. It's a world of flavour that is so far removed from your own that it feels almost fictional. You can almost smell the sweet, earthy aroma of a pinch of cloves being dropped into a rich stew, a smell that is as exotic and as foreign to you as the stars themselves. As you drift closer to sleep, you are left with the thought that the king's world, for all its grandness, is built on a network of trade and power that you can't even see from your small hut. Your world is local, and his is global. And the difference is in the spices. Your mind's eye now wanders from the king's exotic spices to his equally exotic drinks, while you sip on your cloudy, low-alcohol ale. The king raises a different cup. A cup filled with honeyed mead and the royal cup. This is not a drink of necessity, it's a drink of celebration, a liquid embodiment of power and wealth, and a world away from your simple brew. Mead is a fermented beverage made from honey, water, and yeast. It is a sweet, strong, and intoxicating drink, a drink of warriors and kings, and it has a long and storied history in Ireland. For the king, it's a way of showing his wealth. Honey was a luxury, a rare and expensive commodity, and to have enough of it to brew an entire hall's worth of mead was a sign of immense power. It was a drink that was reserved for the most important occasions, for feasts and for celebrations, and its very presence at the king's table was a statement. The royal cup, often a magnificent, ornate vessel made of silver or gold, was passed around the hall, and everyone, from the lowliest soldier to the highest-ranking noble, would take a drink. This was a communal ritual, a way of binding the king's court together, and the mead itself was a kind of liquid symbol of their shared loyalty. For you, the peasant, your tankard of ale is a solitary pleasure or a simple shared moment with a neighbour. The king's cup is a shared experience of power, a kind of ceremonial act that reinforces the social order. Historians still argue whether mead was a more common drink than texts suggest, but there's no doubt that for you, it would have been a rare, almost mythical beverage. You might hear a seonchayi storyteller tell a tale of a hero who drank a magical mead that gave him strength, and you would imagine what it must taste like. You might even have a small amount of honey, a gift from your own bees, but to have enough to brew a whole batch of mead, that's a different level of wealth. The king's mead would also likely be flavoured with a variety of spices, another display of his global connections and his access to exotic ingredients. The sweet, floral aroma of the honey and the deep, rich colour of the mead are a stark contrast to your watery, grain-based ale. Your drink is functional, his is a pleasure. Your drink is for survival, his is for celebration. It's a fundamental difference in how food and drink are viewed in your respective worlds. For the king, food is not just a necessity, it's a form of entertainment, a kind of high-stakes performance that he puts on for his court. As you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the image of that royal cup, filled with a golden, intoxicating liquid. It's a symbol of a life of ease, of a world where honey is not just a treat, but a key ingredient in a staple drink. You are a long way from the king's table, but for a moment, you can almost taste that sweet mead on your tongue, and in your simple, quiet life. That is a kind of magic all its own. The king's cup is a world away, and you are left to your dreams. Having witnessed the extravagance of the royal feasts, your mind now turns to a source of food that is both mundane and miraculous, the king's fish pond and freshwater delicacies. While you might occasionally catch a small fish in a nearby stream, the king's fish are a different breed altogether. They are raised in carefully managed, man-made ponds, a kind of aquaculture that is a testament to the king's wealth and control over his resources. Fish, especially freshwater fish, were a crucial part of the medieval diet, particularly on fast days when meat was forbidden. But for the king, a fish was not just a substitute for meat, it was a delicacy in its own right. His fish ponds would be stocked with plump, rich-tasting trout and salmon, and they would be managed by a specialized piscator or fish keeper. This kind of controlled food source was a way of ensuring a steady supply of protein, a kind of biological bank account that the king could draw on whenever he pleased. These ponds were not just for food, they were a status symbol. They required a great deal of labor to build and maintain, and their very existence was a sign of the king's power and his ability to command resources. They were a kind of living, breathing larder, a permanent source of fresh fish that was not subject to the whims of the seasons or the luck of the hunt. This kind of food security was a luxury that you, the peasant, could never comprehend. Historians still argue whether the king's fish ponds were a more reliable food source than wild game, but there is no doubt that they offered a kind of predictability that was a luxury in a world of constant uncertainty. The fish would be prepared in a variety of ways, from poaching to roasting, and they would often be served with rich, buttery sauces and a variety of spices, a stark contrast to your own method of simply boiling a small fish in a pot. The king's fish would be a culinary centerpiece, a dish to be marveled at, while your fish would be a small, but welcome, addition to your stew. The difference in preparation is a clear reflection of the difference in status. The king has a team of chefs and a pantry full of spices. You have a pot and a fire. You can almost smell the clean, earthy aroma of a freshly caught trout, and you can imagine the delicate, flaky texture of its flesh. It's a taste of a different world, a world where food is not just a means of survival, but a form of art. The king's fish pond is a symbol of his control over the natural world, a kind of taming of the wild that is only possible with immense power and wealth. For you, the world is a wild and unpredictable place, and your food is a gift from the land. For the king, the world is his personal larder, and his food is a product of his command. After contemplating the world of the king, your mind now turns to a different kind of power, one that had a profound effect on the lives of both peasants and kings. The church. You think about the local monastery, a large stone building a few miles from your hut. This is not just a place of worship, it is a center of knowledge, a hub of agricultural innovation, and a lifeline for the poor. It is the monastery's larder and its influence that you now consider, a force that shaped the food culture of medieval Ireland in a way that no king ever could. Monasteries were often self-sufficient, with their own farms, fields, and gardens. They were run by monks who were not just spiritual guides, but also skilled farmers, brewers, and cooks. They were pioneers in agricultural techniques, often experimenting with different crops and methods. They also had a kind of corporate knowledge that was passed down from generation to generation, and they kept detailed records of their harvests and their food production. This kind of organized approach to food was a stark contrast to the small individual efforts of a peasant family. The monastery's larder was a marvel of organization. It would be stocked with a wide variety of foods, from salted meats and preserved fish to a huge variety of grains and vegetables. The monks also had their own private fish ponds, like the king, and they were experts at brewing ale and making mead. The food they produced was not just for their own consumption, it was a way of feeding the poor, on feast days and at the end of the day. A portion of the monastery's food was given to the local villagers, a kind of charitable giving that was a vital part of the social contract. Historians still argue whether the monastic diet was healthier than the peasant diet, but there is no doubt that they had access to a wider variety of foods and were better equipped to survive lean times. The monks were also a kind of culinary bridge between the world of the peasant and the world of the king. They had access to trade routes and spices, and they were able to experiment with different dishes. They often cooked for the local lords and even the king, and they would bring their own unique culinary style to the royal table. They were, in a way, the original gourmands, a group of people who had the time, the resources, and the knowledge to truly appreciate and experiment with food. Their influence on medieval cooking cannot be overstated. You can almost smell the rich, earthy aroma of the monastery's kitchens, a complex mix of roasted meat and herbs, a scent that is so different from your own simple, peat-smoked meals. You are a part of a small, individual effort to survive, but the monastery is a part of a larger, organized, and powerful system. The food you eat is a product of your own hard work. The food they eat is a product of a communal effort, a religious mission, and a kind of social and economic power that is both humbling and awe-inspiring. Your mind, still lingering at the monastery, now turns to its most beautiful and useful part, the gardens. These are not just fields for grain, these are carefully tended plots dedicated to gardens of the monastery and medicinal herbs. While you might forage for a few wild plants, the monks have a systematic, almost scientific approach to their gardens, a knowledge that is a source of both food and healing. The monastery garden is an oasis of order in a world of wild nature. It is divided into neat beds, each one with a different purpose. There would be a vegetable garden, a herb garden, and a small orchard. The monks, with their access to books and a shared knowledge base, would know which plants grew best in which conditions, and they would experiment with different planting methods. This kind of organized agriculture was a model for the local community, a kind of agricultural university that you could learn from just by observing. They were the ones who perfected the cultivation of certain crops, and they introduced new ones. The herb garden, in particular, would be a marvel. While you might use a bit of wild garlic or onion for flavor, the monk's garden would be a library of smells and tastes. There would be rosemary, thyme, sage, and mint, all grown for their culinary and medicinal properties. These herbs would be used to flavor the monks' meals, but they were also a kind of primitive pharmacy. The monks were often the only source of medical care for the local community, and their knowledge of herbs was a crucial part of their healing practice. A cup of mint tea for a bad stomach, a poultice of comfrey for a broken bone. These were not just old wives' tales. They were a form of practical, effective medicine. Historians still argue whether the monks' medicinal practices were more effective than the local folk medicine, but there is no doubt that they had a more organized and systematic approach. They would grow specific plants for specific ailments, and they would keep detailed records of their uses. This kind of knowledge was a source of great power and influence, and it was a way for the monastery to assert its authority in the community. It's a kind of quiet, powerful influence that is a stark contrast to the king's loud, boisterous feasts. The king's power is in his food, the monk's power is in their knowledge of food. You can almost smell the pungent, earthy aroma of the herbs in the garden, a complex mix of scents that is a world away from the simple smell of your peat fire. It's a smell that speaks of care, of order, and of a deep connection to the land. This is not a garden for survival, it's a garden for healing and for flavor. A kind of luxury that is only possible with a great deal of time and resources as you drift closer to sleep. You are left with the image of those neat rows of herbs, a small, perfect world within a larger, chaotic one, from the monastery's orderly gardens. Your thoughts turn back to the spiritual life that dictated so much of the medieval world, and to a cycle that profoundly influenced everyone's diet, the fast and feast cycle of the church. This wasn't just about what you ate on feast days, it was a constant rhythm that defined your week and your year, a religious requirement that affected both peasant and king. The church's calendar was divided into periods of fasting and feasting. The most obvious fast day was Friday, when meat was forbidden. But there were also longer periods of fasting, like Lent, the 40 days leading up to Easter, or Advent, the period before Christmas. During these times, people would abstain from meat, and sometimes from other rich foods like eggs and butter. For the peasant, this wasn't a huge change. You were already living on a grain-heavy, meat-light diet. You would simply eat more fish, if you could get it, or more pulses and vegetables. It was a kind of spiritual and physical discipline that you were already used to. For the king, however, it was a different story. For him, a fast day was a real sacrifice. He was used to eating roasted meats and rich, buttery foods, and to give that up for a period of time was a significant act of piety. The king's chefs would have to come up with creative ways to make a meal without meat. They would use a variety of fish, from the fresh salmon of the fish ponds to salted cod from the sea, and they would prepare them with spices and rich sauces. They would also make intricate mock dishes, like a pie shaped like a pig but filled with fish. It was a kind of culinary paradox, a way of showing piety while still displaying wealth. Historians still argue whether the fast was truly a hardship for the rich, or if it was just an excuse to show off their culinary ingenuity. The feast days, on the other hand, were a time of joyous overindulgence. After a long period of fasting, people would celebrate with the richest, most decadent foods they could get. For the peasant, this was the time for a bit of salted meat, a piece of cheese, and a stronger ale. For the king, it was a time for a veritable explosion of food, with roasted meats, fine breads, and rich desserts. It was a time to celebrate and to show off the abundance of the kingdom. This cycle of denial and indulgence was a central part of medieval life, and it was a constant reminder of the spiritual dimension of food. You think about the contrast. Your body, used to a simple diet, is more or less unaffected by the fasts. The king's body, used to a rich diet, feels the fasts acutely. The church's rules, meant to bring everyone together in a shared spiritual discipline, actually highlight the vast social and economic divide between you and the king. The fast and feast cycle is a kind of living, breathing reminder that even in a world of shared faith, you and the king are still living in two very different worlds. Your mind, a quiet spectator, is now back in the familiar confines of your humble hut. You look around, and your eyes settle on the most important piece of furniture you own, your humble potter and the everyday stew. This is not a fancy pot, it's a simple, clay vessel. Blackened by countless hours over the fire, it is the heart of your home, and it's the source of almost all of your meals. In a world without ovens, without metal pots and pans, this pot is your most valuable cooking tool, a kind of magic cauldron that transforms simple ingredients into a filling, life-sustaining meal. The stew, or pottage as it's often called, is the ultimate peasant meal. It is a one-pot dish that can be endlessly adapted to whatever you have on hand. It's the leftovers of the day before, the new finds from the field, and the constant, reliable presence of grains. You might throw in some wild herbs you foraged, some root vegetables you pulled from the ground, a handful of dried oats, and if you're lucky, a bit of old, salted pork. Everything goes into the pot, and everything is cooked slowly, for hours, over a low peat fire. The result is a thick, hearty, and somewhat monotonous meal. But it is also a meal of profound security. The beauty of the stew is its efficiency. It requires minimal effort and supervision. You can put it on the fire in the morning, and it will be ready for you when you come back from the fields. It also ensures that nothing is wasted. Every scrap of food, every vegetable stalk, every bit of leftover grain finds its way into the pot. This is a crucial part of your life, a zero-waste philosophy born not of environmental concern, but of sheer, unadulterated necessity. You can't afford to throw anything away. Every single calorie is a calorie you worked for, and every calorie is a step closer to getting through another day. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet, for all its simplicity, was more balanced and healthy than the king's rich and fatty one. You might be missing out on meat, but you are also not dealing with the gout and other diseases that come from a diet of rich foods. Your stew, with its mix of grains, vegetables, and herbs, is a kind of nutritional catch-all, a single dish that provides a wide variety of nutrients. It is a food of balance, a food that is designed to keep you strong and healthy for a life of hard labor. You can almost smell the earthy aroma of the simmering stew, a scent that is so familiar it feels like a part of your soul. It's the smell of your home, of your family, and of your life. It is the smell of security, the promise that you will not go hungry, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the image of that simple, clay pot, bubbling away over the fire, a constant, quiet presence that holds the very essence of your life. It's not a lot, but it's enough, and for you, that's everything. Your mind, still fixed on the simple art of cooking, now turns to the practicalities of it. In your world, there are no fancy stovetops or electric ovens. There is only fire. Your life is dictated by simple cooking methods and open fires. And these methods are as old as your people themselves. Your cooking is a kind of primal art, a direct interaction between the heat of the fire and the raw ingredients from the land. The first and most important method is boiling. Your clay potter hangs from an iron tripod over the central peat fire in your hut. This is how you make your daily stew, your porridge, and how you cook any of the vegetables you've grown or foraged. The slow, constant heat of the peat fire, with its smoky, earthy smell, is perfect for this kind of long, slow cooking. Boiling is an incredibly efficient method, as it allows you to cook a wide variety of ingredients at once, and it also makes food, like tough meat or fibrous vegetables, easier to eat. It's also a way of making unclean water safe to drink. The boiling process kills any of the pathogens that might be lurking in the stream water you used to fill your pot. The second method is roasting. While you don't have an oven, you can cook directly over or in the embers of the fire. A piece of fish wrapped in leaves, a root vegetable buried in the hot ashes, or even a small piece of meat on a spit. These are all ways you can use the heat of the fire to cook your food. This method gives food a smoky, charred flavor that is a simple pleasure. It's a kind of primal barbecue, a direct link to a time before pots and pans, when humans cooked their food directly in the flames. You think about the king's vast brick ovens, so carefully controlled and so efficient, and you appreciate the simplicity and the directness of your own method. The food you eat has a flavor that is a direct result of the fire itself. Historians still argue whether the lack of advanced cooking methods limited the medieval diet's nutritional value, but from your perspective, these methods are more than enough. They are simple, effective, and they allow you to cook everything you need to survive. They are also a kind of art form, a knowledge that is passed down from generation to generation. You know how to read the heat of the fire, how to tell when the stew is ready, and how to make sure your food doesn't burn. This is a skill, a craft, that is as important as your ability to work the land. You can almost feel the heat of the fire on your face and smell the smoky aroma of a roasted parsnip. It's a simple but beautiful culinary world, a world where the act of cooking is not a chore but a kind of communion with the elements. You don't have a kitchen, you have a hearth. And that hearth is the center of your universe. It provides you with heat, with light, and with the most important thing of all, your next meal. As you fall deeper into sleep, you realize that your world lacks something that modern people take completely for granted: refrigeration. This absence meant that you had to be an expert in preservation techniques, salt, smoke, and drying. These were not just clever tricks, they were the very lifeblood of your survival. The only way you could make it through the lean months of winter when the fields were fallow and the animals were scarce. The most common and important method was salting. Salt was a valuable commodity, and you would use it to preserve meat and fish. You'd rub the salt into the flesh, a process that draws out the moisture and prevents the growth of bacteria. The meat would be stored in a barrel, and it would last for months. A kind of insurance policy against a bad winter. The downside, the meat was incredibly tough and salty, and you'd have to soak it for hours before you could cook it. But the taste, a kind of briny, preserved flavor, was a small price to pay for the security it provided. The second method was smoking. You'd build a small smokehouse, a kind of small hut with a fire pit, and you'd hang meat or fish from the ceiling. The smoke from the fire, with its antibacterial properties, would cure the meat, giving it a rich, smoky flavor and a dark, leathery texture. This was a slow process, a kind of low and slow cooking that took days, but the result was a meat that would last for months, a food that was both delicious and durable. Finally, there was drying. You'd dry fruits, vegetables, and even some meats in the sun or over a low fire. You'd slice your vegetables thinly, string them on a cord, and hang them from the rafters of your hut. The hot, dry air would remove the moisture, and the food would shrink into a hard, brittle, but perfectly preserved form. You'd have to rehydrate it before you could eat it, but it would last for a very, very long time. Historians still argue whether the high-salt diet of the medieval peasant was a major cause of health problems, but for you, the person trying to survive, the alternative was starvation. You didn't have a choice. These preservation techniques were a kind of life-saving magic, a way of turning the bounty of a good season into a lifeline for a bad one. They were a testament to the ingenuity of your ancestors, a knowledge that was passed down through generations. You can almost feel the rough, salty texture of the dried meat in your hand, a kind of physical reminder of the precariousness of your life. Every preserved morsel is a promise that you will make it through another day. Your mind's journey now takes you to the most crucial moment of your year, the preparation of the winter larder and your survival. This isn't just a matter of stocking a pantry, it's a kind of desperate, hopeful ritual, a moment when all of your hard work from the year comes to fruition, and you make a kind of wager with the gods. Your ability to get through the cold, lean months is entirely dependent on how well you've prepared in the short, abundant months of summer and fall. You picture your small, dark storage room, a corner of your hut set aside for the most precious of goods. There are sacks of dried oats and barley, a kind of golden hoard that represents your family's future. You've carefully measured and stored them, making sure they are safe from rats and rot. There are bundles of dried herbs and strings of dried vegetables. Their shrunken forms a promise of flavor and nutrition for the coming months. You might have a crock of salted butter, or a few jars of honey you've managed to harvest from your beehives. And if you are incredibly lucky, there might be a small bit of salted meat hanging from the rafters. A rare treat that you will have to ration carefully. The food in your larder is not just for eating, it's a symbol of your security. Every sack of grain, every dried herb, is a tiny victory against the forces of nature that are constantly threatening to wipe you out. This is a very different kind of wealth than the king's. His wealth is in his ability to command resources and people. to trade with distant lands. Your wealth is in your own hard work, in your ability to coax enough food from the land to make it through the winter. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant lived in a state of constant fear of starvation. But you know that every time you look at your larder, you are reminded of just how precarious your life is. You are a kind of primitive prepper, a person who lives with the constant knowledge that a bad season, a failed crop, or an unexpected raid could mean the end of everything. The food in your larder is not for pleasure, it is for survival. It is a promise that you will be able to feed your children, that you will not have to go hungry, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you can almost feel the rough texture of the sacks of grain under your hands, a kind of physical comfort that is more valuable than any amount of gold. The winter is coming, but for tonight, you are safe. Your mind, a quiet, watchful spirit, now shifts its focus to the future of your family, to the children's meal and simple fare. In your world, a child's diet isn't a matter of choice or preference, it's a matter of practicality and survival. You think about your own children, their small, hungry faces, and the food you give them, a meal that is a direct reflection of your family's simple resources. A child's diet begins with their mother's milk, of course, a natural and perfect food, but as they get older, their meals become a mirror of your own. They eat the same watery porridge you eat, the same root vegetables, and the same simple stews. There are no special children's foods in this world, no sweet treats or easy snacks. A child's meal is simply a smaller portion of the family's meal, a kind of nutritional baptism into the realities of your life. The one notable difference is milk. Children would drink more milk than adults, a kind of luxury that was a direct result of the family cow. This milk, with its rich fat and protein content, was a vital source of nutrition for a growing body. You would watch your children drink it, a kind of quiet pleasure that you would never experience yourself. It was a kind of unspoken act of love, a sacrifice that you would make for your family. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant child received a nutritionally complete diet, but you know that you are doing the best you can with what you have. You can almost hear the quiet, happy sound of your children eating their simple meal. Their face is a kind of testament to your hard work. Their meal is a constant, physical reminder of the precariousness of your life. A bad harvest would mean they would eat less. A good harvest would mean they would eat a little more. Their stomachs are a kind of living, breathing barometer of your family's well-being, and you live with the constant, quiet fear of a bad harvest. The simple fare you give them, the porridge and the milk, is a kind of life-saving simplicity. It's a diet that is designed to keep them alive, to give them the strength they need to grow into adults who can work the land and continue the cycle. It's a kind of culinary heritage, a set of recipes and traditions that are not just about food, but about survival, about family, and about the quiet, enduring love that holds it all together. Having thought about the lives of both peasants and kings, your mind now turns to a different kind of person, the traveller, in a world without roads and inns as we know them. What did a person carry for sustenance on the road and travel rations? You, the peasant, rarely leave your village, but you know that a journey, even a short one, requires careful planning and a kind of culinary self-sufficiency. A traveller's ration was all about practicality. You wouldn't carry anything that could spoil or was too heavy. The most important food item was hard bread, a dense, dry bread that was baked specifically for long journeys. It was so hard, in fact, that you'd often have to dip it in water or ale to make it edible. It was a food of pure function, designed to provide calories without taking up too much space or weight. It was the medieval version of a protein bar, a kind of unspoilable, long-lasting fuel source. Another key item was salted meat or fish. You'd carry a small piece of preserved pork or a dried fish, a kind of salty, tough snack that was a valuable source of protein. It wasn't delicious, but it was durable and it could last for weeks. You might also carry some dried fruit or vegetables. Their shrunken forms a promise of a small bit of sweetness or flavour on a long, monotonous journey. And of course, you'd carry a skin of ale, a much safer and more reliable source of hydration than an unknown stream. The contents of a traveller's bag are a kind of reflection of their social status. A rich merchant might carry a small loaf of fine white bread, a piece of cured ham, and a flask of spiced wine. A travelling monk might carry a piece of dried fish and a bit of cheese. You, the peasant, would carry a handful of hard bread and a bit of dried meat. a stark reminder that even on the road, the social hierarchy dictates what you can and cannot eat. Historians still argue whether the medieval traveller's diet was a healthy one, but it was certainly a practical one, designed for survival, not for pleasure. You can almost feel the rough texture of that hard bread in your hands, a kind of physical reminder of the rigors of travel in this world. Every meal on the road is a kind of test, a small battle against hunger and the elements. You might not travel much, but you know that for those who do, food is not a luxury, it's a lifeline, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you are grateful for the simple fact that you are in your own bed, with a full stomach, and that for tonight, your journey is over. Your mind, a quiet passenger in the world of your imagination, is now listening to a different kind of voice. It's the voice of the seankai, the storyteller. In a world without books, without writing, the role of the seankai, storyteller, and food lore was crucial. These were the people who carried the history, the legends, and the traditions of your people in their minds, and their stories were often woven around the central theme of food. A seanchai would come to the village, and the whole community would gather around a fire in the alehouse to listen. They would tell tales of magical feasts, of heroes who were blessed with a never-ending supply of food, and of legendary harvests that saved a kingdom from starvation. These stories weren't just for entertainment, they were a way of teaching. They taught you about your history, about the importance of generosity, and about the deep, almost spiritual connection between your people and the land. They were a kind of cultural food bank, a way of preserving the stories of survival and abundance for future generations. One such story might be about the Crom Doob, a legendary figure who was said to have stolen a magical pig that could feed 100 men, or a tale about a hero who, through an act of bravery, was granted a magical cauldron that was always full of a rich, warm stew. These stories were a way of giving you hope. They were a reminder that even in a world of hardship and scarcity, there was a kind of magic to be found in food, a kind of abundance that could be earned through bravery and skill. Historians still argue whether these food-related myths and legends had a real-world impact on people's diet, but there's no doubt that they shaped your cultural relationship with food. They taught you to view food not just as a necessity, but as a gift, a blessing, and a source of magic. They were a way of taking the monotony out of your daily meals and infusing them with a sense of wonder. The seanchai was not just a storyteller, he was a kind of culinary bard, a person who celebrated the power and the importance of food in every single one of his tales. As you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the echo of those stories, the image of those magical feasts, and the feeling that your own simple food is a part of a much larger, much more magical story. The food you eat is not just a food of a peasant, it is a food of a people, a food that is a part of a long and beautiful history. Your mind, a quiet, contemplative observer, now turns to the way your world is viewed by outsiders and by people like me from a different time. You are forced to confront the gap between your reality and the medieval diet and modern misconceptions. You see, we in the modern world have a very romanticized and often incorrect idea of what you eat. We see images of grand feasts with roasted swans and think that's what everyone ate. We imagine a kind of rustic, hearty diet that was both simple and healthy. The reality, as you know, is a bit more complicated. One of the biggest misconceptions is that the medieval diet was a feast or famine affair. For the rich, it was. But for you, the peasant, it was a daily grind of subsistence, a constant battle against a monotonous, grain-heavy diet. You lived on porridge, vegetables, and ale, with meat being a rare and special treat. The idea that everyone was feasting on venison and wild boar is a fiction. Those foods were for the king and his court, a symbol of their power, not a staple for the common person. Another misconception is that the diet was full of exotic spices. As you know, those were for the wealthy. The vast majority of people, like you, flavoured their food with locally foraged herbs, salt, and maybe a bit of garlic or onion. The idea that medieval food was bland is also a bit of a myth. It was just a different kind of flavour. A flavour that was rooted in the land, not in a global spice trade. Historians still argue whether the peasant diet was truly more nutritious than the king's rich and fatty one. But there's no doubt that your diet was a more balanced one, a diet that was designed for labor, not for indulgence. You are a kind of living, breathing proof that the romanticized view of the medieval world is wrong. You are a person who lives by the rhythms of the seasons, who works hard for every single meal, and who views a piece of cheese as a luxury. Your diet is not a lifestyle choice, it is a necessity. It is a constant, physical reminder of your place in the social hierarchy. It is a testament to your resilience and your resourcefulness. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that your reality is much more complex and much more human than any modern misconception could ever capture. Your mind, a quiet passenger in the world of your imagination, is now thinking about a very specific part of the royal world, the animals that were not just hunted, but revered. You think about the Irish wolfhound and its diet, a creature that was a symbol of strength and nobility, a dog that ate better than most people. For the king, the wolfhound wasn't just a pet, it was a companion in the hunt, a guardian of the hall, and a living, breathing symbol of his power. The wolfhound was a massive dog, bred for hunting wolves and other large game. To keep such a powerful animal healthy and strong, it required a very specific and rich diet, a diet that was a world away from your own. While you might give your own dog a few scraps from your table, if there were any, the wolfhound would be fed on a regular basis. And with the kind of food that you could only dream of, the king's dog would eat the leftovers from the royal table, which for you would be a veritable feast. It would get bones with meat still attached, bits of leftover roasted venison, and scraps of bread so fine that you'd never even touch it. This is a very real and very poignant example of the social hierarchy. The king's dog eats better than a peasant family. It's a kind of quiet, cruel joke that you live with every day. The dog's diet is a physical, undeniable sign of its status. It is a symbol of the king's wealth and his generosity. The wolfhound is a treasured animal, a member of the royal household, and its well-being is a direct reflection of the king's power. Historians still argue whether the Irish wolfhound was a more pampered animal than other royal pets. But there is no doubt that its diet was a world away from your own. You think about your own dog, a small, scrawny creature that survives on scraps and whatever it can scavenge. It's a companion. Yes, but it is not a symbol of wealth. It is just another mouth to feed. The king's dog, on the other hand, is a kind of living, breathing art piece, a majestic animal that is a part of the spectacle of royal life. Its diet is a testament to its status, a sign that it is a part of a world of abundance and luxury. You can almost hear the wolfhound's deep, contented sigh as it chews on a bone, a sound that is as full of a quiet, satisfied power as the king's own voice. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that in this world, even the dogs are a part of the social hierarchy, and you are left to your own simple, but dignified, meals. Your mind, a quiet passenger in the world of your imagination, is now thinking about a very specific and dark part of your people's history, while you, the peasant, live with a constant fear of scarcity. You are also living with the distant, historical echoes of a much greater tragedy, the Great Famine. This is not the famine that you know from your history books, the one that happened in the 19th century, but a constant, low-level threat that has hung over your people for centuries. It's the memory of a time when the crops failed, the animals died, and the very ground itself turned against you. The famine is not just a historical event, it is a kind of cultural memory, a fear that is passed down from generation to generation. It's the reason you work so hard, the reason you are so careful with every single grain of barley. It's the reason you are so grateful for every small, humble meal. Your diet, for all its simplicity, is a direct result of a people who have lived with the constant and quiet threat of starvation. The famine is a kind of ghost, a quiet presence in your world that reminds you of what can happen when the food runs out. You think about the stories you've heard, the tales of people who had to eat grass and roots to survive. You think about the quiet desperation that must have filled their lives, a kind of hunger that is so deep it can't be satisfied. This is the ultimate fear, the kind of fear that a king, for all his power, can never truly understand. He can hoard his food, he can import from other lands, but you are tied to the land, and if the land fails, you fail with it. Historians still argue whether the pre-famine Irish peasant was a more resilient group due to their long history of coping with scarcity, but you know that resilience comes at a cost that is paid in a constant, low-level anxiety. The Great Famine is a stark reminder that in this world, food is not a commodity, it is a lifeline. It is a thing that can be taken away in an instant, and when it is, everything else falls apart. Your diet, with its focus on grains and its reliance on preservation, is a kind of insurance policy against this kind of tragedy. You are not living for today, you are living for tomorrow, and for all the tomorrows to come. Your mind, a quiet passenger in the world of your imagination, is now thinking about a very specific part of your economic reality. In a world without money as we know it, the price of labor and food as currency was a constant, physical part of your life. Your work was not paid for in coins, but in food. A direct and undeniable link between your labor and your sustenance. You would work for the local lord, toiling in his fields, building his fences, and repairing his roads. And for this labor, you would not receive a handful of coins. Instead, you would receive a portion of the harvest, a sack of grain, or a promise of a certain amount of food. This system, known as a manorial system or a feudal system, was a direct and undeniable link between your labor and your sustenance. Your value was measured not in money, but in the food you could produce. This system was a way of ensuring that the lord had a steady supply of labor and that you had a steady supply of food. It was a kind of social contract, a kind of unspoken agreement that was a part of your life from the moment you were born. But it also meant that you were tied to the land, that your entire life was dictated by the harvest. A bad harvest meant that your labor was worth less, that you would receive less food, and that you would go hungry. Historians still argue whether this system was a more equitable one than a wage-based system, but you know that in your world it was a system of quiet, constant uncertainty. You think about the contrast between your life and the king's. His wealth is in his ability to command resources and people, to trade with distant lands. Your wealth is in your own hard work, in your ability to coax enough food from the land to make it through the winter. And you are a kind of living, breathing currency, a person whose value is measured in the grain you can produce. You can almost feel the rough texture of that sack of grain on your shoulder, a physical reminder of the precariousness of your life. Every single grain is a testament to your hard work, a kind of living wage that you have to earn every single day, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that in this world, food is not just a commodity, it is a currency, and you are a part of the economic engine that produces it. Your mind, a quiet observer, now shifts its focus to the very heart of your social life, social rituals and shared meals. While the king's feasts were a spectacle of power and wealth, your shared meals were a different kind of ritual, a ritual of community and connection. They were a way of cementing your bonds with your neighbors, a way of sharing your burdens and your joys, and a way of reminding yourself that you are not alone in this world. You would eat your meals with your family, of course, but you would also eat with your neighbors. You might gather around a communal fire, sharing a pot of stew, and you would talk about the weather, about the crops, and about the small, daily triumphs and tragedies of your life. This was a very different kind of social event than the king's feast. There were no jesters, no bards, and no servants. There were just people, sharing food and sharing stories. The act of sharing food was an important part of your social contract. You would help a neighbor who was sick, and they would help you. You would share your food with a person who had a bad harvest, and they would share theirs with you. This was a kind of informal social safety net, a way of ensuring that everyone in the community had enough to eat. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant lived in a more close-knit community than modern people, but there is no doubt that your lives were intertwined in a way that is hard to imagine. You can almost hear the low hum of conversation, the quiet clatter of wooden bowls, and the sound of laughter. It's a sound that is as comforting and as familiar as the smell of your own hearth. It's the sound of community, the sound of people who are not just surviving, but living together. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that in a world of hardship, your shared meals are a source of great strength. Your mind, a quiet passenger in the world of your imagination, is now back in the king's great hall. You've seen the spectacle of the food, but you are now noticing the quiet. Unspoken rules that govern the feast. This is not just a meal, it is a performance, a kind of choreographed ballet where every single movement, every single gesture, is a part of a larger social statement. You are now thinking about the mead hall's rules and feasting etiquette. The feast hall is a place of rigid hierarchy. The king sits at a raised table, and his most important guests sit closest to him. The farther you are from the king, the lower your status. This is not just a seating chart, it's a physical representation of the social order. You would know, without a single word being spoken, where you stand in the social hierarchy just by looking at the seating chart. The rules of eating are also very specific. You would eat with your fingers, but you would not eat greedily. You would not reach for a piece of meat that was far away from you. You would take what was closest to you, and you would eat it with a kind of quiet, dignified grace. The king, of course, would eat with a kind of unbridled indulgence, a kind of primal display of his power. He is the only person who can eat as much as he wants, in whatever way he wants. Historians still argue whether the medieval feast was a more boisterous and less formal affair than later periods, but you know that in your world, it was a place of a quiet, and often unspoken, set of rules. The feast was a time for celebration, yes, but it was also a time for a kind of social performance, a way of showing your respect for the king and for the social order. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the quiet, unspoken rules that govern every single movement. It's a world of power, of spectacle, and of a kind of quiet, social performance that is a world away from your own simple, honest meals. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even in a place of great indulgence, there are still rules. Your mind, a quiet ghost in the great hall, now notices the characters who populate this world of spectacle. Beyond the nobles and the king, you see a figure who exists to make a different kind of food for the soul. You are now thinking about the jester's joke and feasting entertainment. For you, a simple joke in the alehouse is enough to lift your spirits. For the king, laughter is a part of the performance of power, and the jester is a master craftsman of wit. The jester, with his motley clothing and his silly hat, is a figure of quiet subversion. He is the only person in the hall who can speak his mind without fear of punishment. He can make fun of the king, of the nobles, of the church, and he is not only tolerated but celebrated for it. His jokes are a kind of social safety valve, a way for the court to let off steam without causing a riot, and his jokes are often about food. He might tell a story about a gluttonous knight who eats so much meat he can't fit into his armor, or a story about a greedy priest who hoards all the best bread for himself. These are the kinds of jokes that are not just for fun, they are a way of subtly commenting on the social order. The jester is not the only source of entertainment. There are also bards, who sing songs of heroic battles and epic feasts. There are jugglers and acrobats, who perform feats of skill and strength. All of this entertainment is a part of the spectacle of the feast, a way of keeping the king's guests entertained and of reminding them of the king's power. It is a world where food and entertainment are intertwined, a kind of total sensory experience that you, the peasant, can't even begin to imagine. Historians still argue whether the jester's role was truly one of free speech or if it was a carefully managed performance. But you know that in your world, any joke about the king is a dangerous thing. The jester is a kind of paradox, a person who is both a fool and a truth-teller. He is a part of the king's world, but he is also a kind of outsider, a person who sees the world for what it is. And, as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even in a place of great power, there is still room for a bit of laughter. Your mind, a quiet ghost in the great hall, is now noticing a figure of quiet importance. He is a young man, dressed in fine clothes, and he stands near the king's table, a kind of silent sentry. This is the king's cupbearer and his role. For you, a cup of ale is a simple thing, a drink you share with your neighbors. For the king, a cup is a symbol of trust, and the person who holds it is a figure of great power and influence. The cupbearer's role is not just to pour drinks, he is a person of great importance, and his job is a matter of life and death. He is the first line of defense against poison. He would taste the king's wine or mead before the king would drink it, a kind of living, breathing poison detector. This act of tasting was a kind of ritual, a kind of public display of trust between the king and his cupbearer. If the cupbearer died, everyone would know that the king's drink was poisoned, and they would know to be on their guard. The cupbearer was also a trusted confidant, a person who was always near the king and who could be trusted with the king's secrets. He was a kind of quiet, political advisor, a person who could whisper a word of advice or a warning in the king's ear. This position of trust was a testament to his character and his loyalty. Historians still argue whether the role of cupbearer was more about ceremony or about real power. But you know that in a world of political intrigue and assassination, a person who can be trusted with the king's cup is a person who has a great deal of power. You think about the contrast between this life and your own. You trust your neighbors, but you don't have to worry about them poisoning your drink. Your world is one of quiet, physical danger from nature, from a bad harvest, from a long winter. The king's world is one of a quiet, psychological danger from his enemies, from his rivals, from the people who want to take his power. The cupbearer is a kind of living, breathing symbol of that danger, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even a simple drink can be a matter of life and death. Your mind, a quiet observer, now shifts its focus to a different kind of calendar, one that is as old as your people themselves. You are now thinking about the Feast of Samhain and ancient traditions. This is not a Christian holiday, but an ancient Celtic festival that marks the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. It is a time when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead is at its thinnest, and it is a time that is deeply intertwined with your diet. Samhain, which we know today as Halloween, was a time of great feasting. It was the last chance to eat the rich, fresh foods of the harvest before the long, lean months of winter. You would slaughter your animals, the ones you couldn't afford to feed through the winter, and you would feast on the fresh meat. You would also celebrate the end of the harvest with a meal of the last of the crops, a kind of thanksgiving for the food you've received. This was a time of great celebration, a kind of joyous overindulgence before the quiet, sober reality of winter. But it was also a time of great spiritual significance. You would leave food outside your hut for the spirits of the dead, a kind of offering to keep them from coming inside. You would light bonfires to ward off evil spirits and to guide the souls of the dead to the afterlife. This was a time when food was not just for your body, it was for your soul and for the souls of your ancestors. Historians still argue whether the modern traditions of Halloween have a direct link to the ancient rituals of Samhain, but you know that the feeling of this time of year, the feeling of a quiet, spiritual feast, is a part of your blood. The Feast of Samhain is a stark reminder that your diet is not just about a daily routine. It is a part of a larger, much older, much more spiritual cycle. The food you eat is a part of your history, a part of your culture, and a part of your very soul. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even the simplest meal can have a deep and profound spiritual meaning. Your mind, a quiet observer, is now back in the familiar confines of your home. You are no longer thinking about the king's grand feasts or the monastery's rich larder. You are thinking about the most important part of your diet, a part that is both mundane and miraculous, the kitchen garden and household sustenance. This is not a grand, manicured space. It's a small, fenced-in plot near your hut, a patch of land that is a living, breathing pantry and a source of incredible security. This small garden is a kind of biological insurance policy. It's where you grow the things you can't get from the fields, the things that add a bit of variety and nutrition to your grain-heavy diet. You might have a few rows of onions and leeks. Their pungent flavor a welcome addition to your stew. You might have a patch of cabbages, a sturdy, reliable vegetable that can be stored for a long time. You might even have a few root vegetables, like parsnips and turnips, that you can pull from the ground throughout the year. This garden is a kind of living, breathing larder, a source of food that is always there, always ready to provide. The food from this garden is not just for eating, it's a source of great pride. Every time you pull a cabbage from the ground or pluck an onion from a row, you are reminded of your own hard work, your own ingenuity, and your own ability to provide for your family. This is a very different kind of pride than the king's. His pride is in his ability to command resources and people. Your pride is in your ability to coax life from the soil, a kind of primal connection that is a world away from the king's. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant's diet was truly self-sufficient, but you know that your kitchen garden, for all its small size, is a crucial part of your survival. You can almost smell the earthy aroma of the soil and the pungent smell of the onions. It's a smell that is so familiar it feels like a part of your soul. It's the smell of security, the promise that you will not go hungry. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that in a world of hardship, your small, simple garden is a source of great strength. It's a testament to your resilience and your resourcefulness, a living, breathing promise that you will make it through another day. Your mind, a quiet observer, is now thinking about a very specific and simple act of sustenance. You've seen the king's fish ponds, but you know that for you, a meal from the water is a much simpler affair. You are now thinking about the potted fish and river harvest. For you, the river is not a source of sport or of luxury, it's a source of food, a kind of wild pantry that you can draw on whenever you need it. You would walk down to the river, a simple fishing line in your hand, and you would wait. You wouldn't catch a grand, majestic salmon, you would catch small, silvery fish, the kind that were too small for the king to care about. You'd bring them back to your hut, and you would put them in your potter, the same one you use for your stew. You would boil them, bones and all, and they would be a part of your meal, a small but welcome source of protein. This is a very different kind of fishing than the king's. His is a sport, yours is a necessity. The act of catching these small fish is a kind of primal joy. It's a reminder that you are a part of the natural world, a person who can survive on what the land and the water can provide. It's a kind of quiet, simple triumph, a victory against the constant threat of hunger. Historians still argue whether the peasant's diet was truly as varied as we imagine, but you know that every time you bring a fish from the river, you are adding a bit of diversity to your meals. You can almost feel the cool, wet scales of the fish in your hands and hear the quiet sizzle as they cook in your pot. It's a simple, but beautiful, culinary world, a world where food is a direct result of your own hard work and your own connection to the natural world. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even the smallest meal can be a source of great joy. Your mind, a quiet spectator in the world of your imagination, is now in the king's vast kitchen, and you are watching a scene of controlled chaos. You have seen the roasted meats, but you are now thinking about the person who prepares them. You are now thinking about the butcher's trade and the king's meat. For you, a pig is an animal you would eat only in its entirety, using every single part. For the king, a pig is a source of a variety of cuts, each one a different kind of luxury, and the butcher is an artist who knows how to prepare them all. The butcher in the king's court is a master craftsman, a person of great skill and importance. He doesn't just slaughter animals, he disassembles them, separating the different cuts of meat, each one with its own value and its own purpose. He knows how to prepare a haunch of venison for a roast, a loin of pork for a rich stew, and the offal for a hearty pie. This kind of specialized knowledge is a world away from your own simple knowledge of how to gut and clean a fish. The butcher is a kind of culinary surgeon, a person who can turn a single animal into a dozen different dishes. The meat he prepares is not just food, it is a symbol of the king's wealth and his access to the best resources. The butcher has access to the finest animals, animals that are raised specifically for the king's table. They are not scrawny and tough like your animals, they are plump and tender, a product of a life of ease and good food. The butcher's trade is a kind of quiet, physical proof that the king has control over the entire food supply, from the animals in the field to the meat on his plate. Historians still argue whether the medieval butcher's trade was more or less regulated than a modern one, but you know that in your world, his skill is a source of great power. You can almost smell the sharp, metallic aroma of the meat and the earthy smell of the blood. It's a smell that is both primal and powerful, a smell that is a world away from the simple, clean smell of your own hearth. The butcher is a kind of quiet, physical reminder of the king's power, a person who holds the power of life and death over the animals that will be served at the king's table. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even the simplest act, like the butchering of an animal, can be a matter of great power. Your mind, a quiet ghost in the great hall, now notices the aftermath of the feast. The nobles and the king have eaten their fill, and the leftovers are being carried away. But they are not being thrown away, they are being given to the poor. You are now thinking about the leftovers and the poor. For you, a leftover is a simple thing, a bit of stew that you will eat for breakfast. For the king, a leftover is a form of charity, a way of showing his generosity, and a way of asserting his social and moral authority. The leftovers from the king's feast would be a bounty for you. There would be scraps of meat, pieces of fine bread, and maybe even a bit of a rich stew. These were foods that you would only dream of, and they were being given to you as a kind of royal charity. This act of giving was a kind of unspoken social contract. The king, in exchange for your loyalty, would provide for you in times of need. It was a kind of benevolent feudalism, a way of ensuring that the social order was maintained and that you, the peasant, would not rise up in rebellion. The act of giving leftovers was also a way of showing the king's piety. It was a kind of religious duty, a way of showing that the king was a good and moral man. The church encouraged this kind of charity, and it was a way of ensuring that the poor were taken care of. Historians still argue whether this royal charity was more about control than about compassion, but you know that for you, the person with an empty stomach, the reason doesn't matter. The food is there, and that is what counts. You can almost feel the warmth of that piece of roasted meat in your hand, a kind of physical symbol of the king's generosity. It's a taste of a world you will never be a part of, but it is a taste that reminds you that you are still a part of the king's world, that you are still a part of the social and moral order, and as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even the smallest act, like the giving of leftovers, can be a matter of great social and political significance. Your mind, a quiet ghost in the great hall, now notices the final, quiet detail of the feast. It is the seating arrangement, a seemingly simple detail that is a physical representation of the entire social order. You are now thinking about the mead hall's layout and social hierarchy. The feast is not just about eating, it is a carefully choreographed performance of power and status. And the layout of the hall is a kind of living, breathing map of the social order. The king sits at a raised dais, a position that physically elevates him above everyone else. His most trusted and powerful nobles sit closest to him, at a long table that runs parallel to his. The farther you are from the king, the lower your status. The common soldiers and the servants would sit at tables that were farthest from the king, and they would be given the least desirable cuts of meat and the most watered-down ale. This is a very real and very poignant example of the social hierarchy. This layout is a way of reinforcing the king's power and his authority. It is a constant, physical reminder that the king is the ultimate source of power and that everyone else is just a part of his court. It is a way of ensuring that everyone knows their place and that everyone knows who is in charge. Historians still argue whether the mead hall was a more democratic or a more autocratic space than later periods. But you know that in your world, it was a place of a quiet, and often unspoken, set of rules. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the quiet, unspoken rules that govern every single movement. It's a world of power, of spectacle, and of a kind of quiet, social performance that is a world away from your own simple, honest meals. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that even a simple seating chart can be a matter of great political significance. Your mind, a quiet ghost in the great hall, now returns to the familiar confines of your humble hut. The feast, the king, and the nobles are gone, replaced by the quiet, earthy sounds of your own life. You are now thinking about the final morsel and your simple life. You have eaten your last, humble meal of the day, a simple bowl of pottage, and you are sitting by the fire, feeling its warmth on your face. This is the moment when all of the grandness of the king's world fades away, and you are left with the quiet, enduring reality of your own. The final morsel of your meal is a kind of benediction, a small, humble moment of gratitude for the food you've received. It is a moment when you are not thinking about what you don't have, but about what you do have. You have a warm fire, a full stomach, and the quiet comfort of your family. You are not a king, and you don't have a grand feast hall, but you have a life that is full of quiet, simple pleasures. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant's life was more or less fulfilling than a modern one. But you know that, in your world, you find great joy in the smallest of things. You can almost feel the warmth of the fire on your face and hear the quiet breathing of your family. It's a sound that is as comforting and as familiar as the smell of your own hearth. It's the sound of a simple life, A life that is not about power and wealth, but about survival and love. And as you fall deeper into sleep, you are left with the quiet knowledge that your simple life is a source of great strength. The feast is over. The fires in the king's hall are dying down. The last scraps of food have been cleared away, and the last drunken reveller has stumbled home. The world of kings and feasts is slowly, quietly, fading away, replaced by the soft, dark blanket of a quiet night. Your mind, too, is slowing down, your thoughts softening, your vocabulary becoming gentler. The end of the feast and the slow fade. You are no longer a ghost in the king's hall. You are back in your own small hut. The scent of peat smoke and damp earth are familiar comfort. The sounds of the day have faded, replaced by the gentle patter of rain on the thatched roof and the soft hoot of a distant owl. The images of grand feasts and golden cups are receding into the deep, quiet corners of your mind, a faint echo of a world you glimpsed for a moment. You are now just a person, lying on a straw-filled pallet, listening to the world of your simple, enduring life. You are safe, you are warm, and your stomach is full. The struggles of the day, the constant threat of hunger, the knowledge of your place in the social order, all of it is fading away, replaced by the quiet, peaceful rhythm of your breathing. The journey is over, the story is told, now. As the last embers of the fire glow, a soft orange in the dark, you can feel yourself sinking deeper and deeper into the gentle, calming embrace of sleep. Your body is heavy, your mind is quiet, and the world is a soft, dark place where nothing can harm you. You are at peace. End of script. Sweet dreams.